let's discuss the issues of the day with our panel. First chat for 2022, Claire March, Managing Director of Counsel House and former Labor advisor, and Fiona Scott, former Liberal MP and Premier State Consultant. Great to see you both. Claire, first to you. The Deputy Prime Minister says people are hoarding the rapid antigen testing. What do you make of it, given the lack of access, at least at the moment, as we speak this afternoon?
Well, look, looking back on last year, you know, if we take out the big political takeout of last year was the lessons to be learned was the federal government, you know, sort of going into Christmas, dragging their feet a little bit, feeling a bit sorry for themselves around their, you know, bungling of the vaccine rollout. Here is a significant public policy exercise that, you know, quite literally touches the lives of each individual Australian. Heading into the election, they obviously wanted a completely different footing. They wanted to have their house in order. They wanted to leave Australians with the impression that this was a mature, competent government that could be trusted with dealing with large-scale public policy problems. And then what lands here for us all to reckon with is a significant supply issues around rat testings. Now, this is not novel. These are tests which should be readily available both commercially and through government programs. They are used internationally. It doesn't take the highest public policy experts in the country to know that Australia needs these things to make our economy work properly. And what do we have? A federal government that effectively was too slow to put in the order, and now our economy has this significant weight drag as we head into the new year and another mark against the Morrison government's name when it comes to the management of this pandemic.
Fiona, the number of Liberals that I've spoken to over the last couple of days preparing for a return to work have expressed concerns about where they're at the moment, in part because of the latest hiccup on the rapid antigen testing supply issue. But I guess the thing is, once the millions do arrive, as Barnaby Joyce says they will next week and beyond, do we get to a situation where people get the kids back to school, we crack on into the year and people forget the latest headache right now?
Yeah, look, Kieran, I think there's a group of challenges here that, you know, you could point fingers at state and federal governments and all sorts of things around the country. I mean, you could point a finger at the McGowan government who were banning rat tests only a few weeks ago. You could point a finger at the Palaszczuk government and say, you know, you didn't get your vaccination rates right and that's why you're holding the kids back. But you know what? This has been a massive public administration. It's been a massive health challenge, and every leader across this country has got some things right and some things wrong. And, you know, so, I mean, I hear what you're saying there, Claire, but there's also an aspect here that, you know, you can't just point a finger at the Morrison government. In regarding the rat test, there's multiple factors going on here. We are in a competition market with global supply to get these things out. And how quickly can some of these companies actually get these rat tests to Australia? That's one of the biggest challenges, is getting that supply right. Secondly, you know, Barnaby Joyce is correct. I mean, there's a couple of things going on with getting them into the hands of the Australian public. One of them is, yes, there has been hoarding. I mean, a lot of people don't want to say that are sitting in political environments, and I applaud Barnaby Joyce for saying that today. There has been that. There has been also people in businesses that have been price gouging these things. I mean, in my local area, my husband and I were trying to get some of these over Christmas, and it was like $45. I mean, around the corner we ended up with an unbranded one for $20. So crazy. That was over near Blacktown, where you are talking about vulnerable communities. So there's a lot of complexity here that, yes, pension card holders are going to get these things for free, that people who are vulnerable and maybe have transport challenges get these things for free. You know, so as the whole thing rolls out, this is what the government has to look at. And, you know, getting the manufacturing right, getting them distributed, getting them to the places. And look, I really applaud the Pharmacy Guild today for what they're doing to be able to step up to get them into every pharmacy across the country. The thing about community pharmacy is that community pharmacy has the ability of getting that reach to really get to all the pension holders that are they're getting other forms of medication or having them distributed, you know, through other means. So this is a challenge. It's showing the Morrison government's getting on top of it. Has Scott Morrison been wearing some of this in the polls? Yes, he probably has been. But is this, you know, curtains for the Morrison government? Not at all. It means that going into this year, it's going to be a challenge, and the Morrison government's up for the fight to the May election.
Claire, also big challenges for small business. New South Wales government apparently, according to Andrew Clennell, my colleague, planning to announce this Job Saver program in the next few days. They've called on the feds to contribute 50-50. No sign from the government. Simon Birmingham, my guest earlier in the program, that they're willing to do that just now.
Well, I think if the federal government is inclined to put more financial assistance into small businesses in New South Wales, it needs to be part of a broader plan. And I guess this is where sort of the stitching comes undone for the federal government. We remembering last year, the Australian public had to put their faith in the Morrison government. The Prime Minister said repeatedly, we have a plan. Every time that there was a call on the government, should you be involved in remedying this risk? Should you be involved in this initiative? Scott Morrison repeated time and time again that he had a plan and that we all just had to stick with his plan in reopening the economy now and living with the disease. Now, the time is here. We are at that point, and this plan that the Prime Minister is, supposedly been fine-tuning for months on end is really in its, naked show here, pretty undercooked. We've got pharmacies. There's 5,500 pharmacies in New South Wales. Only 700 of them can get enough RAT tests to participate in the government scheme to provide them to seniors. We've got kids going back to school that have only become eligible to get their vaccine in order to return to school on the 10th of January. That's not a lot of time. We've got entire workforces hemorrhaging because there is no plan or no appropriate plan around the isolation of those close contacts. But fundamentally, the Morrison government is supposed to be a government that supports the open economy, where we get on with our lives here, the late to shut down, early to release mantra. And we're at that point now, and our economy is suffering, and the Scott Morrison government is really, the sum of their decision-making is what's caused that here.
So,
and I think,
Fiona, do you think the federal government, should the federal government back this New South Wales plan, Fiona?
Look, I think the federal government should back the New South Wales plan, but then that goes a step further. I mean, if it is a 50-50 in New South Wales, I think the same deal should be offered across every state and every territory should the states and territories take that plan up. But the challenge you have then on the federal government when you look at, say, Western Australia, I mean, today on Sky News, we saw heads of the mining sector coming out and saying, look, we have massive understaffing issues now because we've been closed down in Western Australia for so long. The McGowan government will sit there and say, oh, yes, we've all survived so well because of mining. Now, that is coming to a junction now that has to be dealt with. So does the federal government have to foot the bill for decisions made by state premiers? And this is the challenge that the federal government has. And the federal government is going to have to front the Australian public at the end of April with the budget as to how much the last 12 months has cost the federal budget. But they don't necessarily have control of all the levers. And that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges that our federation has as to who pays for what and how things are paid for when the federal government is stuck footing the bill for what states have done. Now, I might be a bit biased to say, sure, New South Wales, I'm from New South Wales, so yeah, pay 50-50, that would be great. But there has to be comparable deals that are offered around all of the states so that there is fairness for all Australians. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge, that the federal government can't just jump in and say, yes, absolutely, until the fullness of this discussion is really had across every state and territory.
Fiona and Claire, great to see you both to start this year. A big few months ahead as we lead into the federal election. Nice to chat as always. See you soon.